Good evening, everybody. This is Edoardo Passoretti, Director of Italian Office from ETFs. I'm here tonight to speak about one of the most exciting fields we are seeing before our own eyes as it develops in our lives, the sector of cloud technologies. And in my role as Director at ETFs, I have the pleasure to convey a lot of different speakers and experts in different fields, being a white label platform, so we have an offering that enables us to speak with the most exciting experts in different fields. Tonight I'm here with Anthony Ginsberg from Gins Global Investment Manager and Index Funds. We're going to go through the field of cloud computing, and I'm really looking forward to hear what Anthony has to say, because in these times we are all having a crash therapy to cloud. I spend like 15 hours a day on the cloud, and I'm really looking forward to hear what Anthony has to say about it. Welcome, Anthony. Let me tell you something before you start. Sorry, so I don't interrupt you later. Thank you for joining the audience live. Can interact with us and send us some questions. Can download some attachments and links from the right-hand side of your screen. Can leave some feedbacks at the end, so all feedbacks are very welcome. We'll save some time at the end for some Q&A sessions, and feel free to get in touch also afterwards when you review this webinar at our contacts at ETF with Anthony, and we welcome all feedbacks. Please, Anthony.
Thank you very much, Edo, and very excited to join you this evening. Obviously, with COVID-19 and the dark storm, we thought that we should talk specifically about cloud computing today, and just the exciting benefits that we've seen. Cloud obviously has been a shining example of benefiting from the current storm, and I'm going to go into some depth about the different areas of cloud computing and just how it's benefited from people during having been forced into a lockdown situation and remote working. And I look forward to your questions, and I'd be more than happy to spend time answering them. So I'm going to go through a bunch of slides rather quickly, and these will be available on HAN ETF's website following on this presentation. So I'm just going to click through to the first slide. We have a cloud technology usage ETF. It's got about 50 holdings. It's been available for over 18 months, and the performance this year has held up very solidly despite the great gyrations and volatility we've seen in the market. It's relatively flat for 2020, and I look forward to explaining to you what is going on inside cloud computing. So the very first slide just shows how such things as the Internet of Things and other areas within Internet and IT particularly are related to the cloud. At the present time, Gartner Research, a leading research firm in the space and in IT in generally, predict 60% of all IT expenditure, both this year and into the next 2 to 3 years, will be dominated by big tech, focusing on cloud technology in particular. And this relates to everything from areas such as M&A activity, corporate activity, as well as large IT budgets. So what we've actually seen is, with the current volatility, that although there are big corporations and even mid-sized companies cutting back on their computer spending, it hasn't really hurt the cloud side. Actually, if anything, the flexibility that the cloud allows and the subscription model that it provides has meant that cloud actually continues to enjoy growth in IT expenditure across most companies, while hardware and other areas in IT departments are being cut at the moment. So really the point about cloud is that it actually is benefiting also from the medical fallout that we're seeing. So a lot of the medical technologies, things like telemedicine, medical wearables, a lot of that, robotics as well, is relying on cloud technology. So increasingly we find hospitals like the NHS service in the UK increasing their bandwidth and cloud technology expenditure to allow doctors and healthcare professionals to work remotely, for example. So just to summarize really what cloud benefits exist for both large and smaller enterprises. The first, I would say, is cost reduction. It removes the need to really run your own IT department. It removes the need to have significant hardware purchases. So that's certainly one area. Part of the cost reduction is the subscription model that cloud provides, where firms are not needing to have as much full-time software or IT staff, and they'll be increasingly able to outsource both that as well as some of the cybersecurity issues. Increasingly, cloud companies and cloud providers are helping on cybersecurity and privacy issues as well. So they often are getting a two-for-one benefit. And as I mentioned, it's a subscription model rather than a once-off big expenditure model. So it's a way of cost reduction, certainly. Increasingly, the reliability in terms of internet access and also the issues of privacy and cybersecurity are thrown into the mix. So you find big cloud providers such as Amazon, AWS, and Microsoft Azure providing significant cybersecurity benefits as well. And I'll just also mention that there's access and efficiency increasingly. Some years ago, the challenge with cloud was that firms had to outsource to one particular cloud provider or stack, and they were unable to really move the data easily between their private systems and the public cloud. Increasingly, there are areas such as the hybrid cloud developing, and you often find big groups like IBM who did a very large acquisition in this hybrid cloud space. They bought a firm called Red Hat. It was the biggest acquisition in IBM's history, a little over $35 billion, and they're making a huge push, IBM, in the hybrid cloud space, and this is really referring to arguably the next 25 to 30% of cloud, the easy part of cloud where just email is outsourced or some very basic admin tasks have historically been outsourced. Increasingly now the idea is to actually be able to move data amongst different cloud platforms, and we call that the hybrid cloud. And increasingly firms like Red Hat with open source software like Linux software are able to allow firms to do that. So you find big companies, the JP Morgans and others of the world, a lot of Fortune 500 firms in the US, likes of AT&T, Verizon here, big telecoms groups. They've actually, when they do cloud contracting now and outsourcing more of their data, they are using often 3 or 4 different cloud providers, and they're able to move the data amongst those. It's a lot easier nowadays to move data between both the public and the private cloud, and thus the term hybrid cloud. And actually that is leading to a lot more adoption of cloud in other areas beyond just simple outsourcing. You find or simple IT type tasks. Increasingly the middle office and even the front office are getting into the cloud space. So while there may be some risks of cloud in terms of certainly there are some companies that are relatively young in the space. One would have to enter into a contract to have ongoing subscription services. In truth, the reliability and the risks have come down. The risks have come down, the reliability has gone up, and you're able to essentially contract with multiple cloud players today. You no longer have to really bet the farm on a single provider. So I think that's a very big change up. And certainly with the COVID-19, we've seen adoption rates in many cases go through the roof. So cloud has become a lot more mainstream over the last couple of years, and increasingly so. It's been boosted, I would say, by coronavirus in the last couple of months. I'm just going to move on to the next slide, which really summarizes the way of breaking it down. So cloud really is divided into three specific areas. In the blue at the bottom of the pyramid, which is really the key infrastructure that has been built out by the likes of Amazon and some other very big server providers. So we call that infrastructure as a service, and that's basically laying the plumbing and the piping globally. And you find in our holdings, roughly 50 holdings in our ETF, often the big tech players where the key battleground is occurring in cloud have really been building out the pipes and the plumbing. On top of that, you find the platforms, and this often relates to applications. There are some very, very big firms, including the likes of SAP and Salesforce and Oracle, who essentially have built out some infrastructure, but primarily platforms that will fit on top of the cloud. And that's the green part there you see. So while infrastructure has been desperately needed to grow the cloud globally, we actually see the areas of platform as a service, and then on the very top of the pyramid, software as a service, really being long-term beneficiaries. And interestingly, in this current environment, the software as a service groups, these are obviously various software designs that can utilize cloud globally. So I mentioned some firms, but such as Oracle, others that would be well known to people such as Salesforce, where Salesforce is now partnered, for example, with Microsoft Azure to utilize Microsoft's platform to be able to spread their software more easily and globally. And you find other firms, whether it's Dropbox, LogMeIn, these are other software as a service providers. Some people use video conferencing as well. Most of the big guys actually do offer video conferencing as well on their cloud platforms, often for free. So it's obviously growing across the board, and we do see ultimately both software as a service and platform as a service becoming larger in terms of revenues than infrastructure as a service. We have a few slides coming up where you'll see the relative size of all three. So if I could just summarize again examples of software as a service, historically those would be Gmail, Hotmail, Dropbox, LogMeIn, other Salesforce type functions for CRM or customer client relationship management. When it comes to platform as a service, they tend to be more like web servers, databases, certain programming environments, and again, infrastructure as a service typically are the very largest big tech players who either control sizable server farms or have basically built out global plumbing and pipes to make it fast and efficient to be able to work remotely. So ultimately, a lot of what you're seeing here relates to the Internet of Things as well. We hear about people being able to control their homes remotely from work. You hear about medical technology, whether it's AI diagnostic machines that are utilized, or it's medical wearables, bracelets, other ways to monitor people's blood sugar levels, for instance, with diabetes. We do certainly see the adoption increasingly of telemedicine as well coming through. So that's all benefiting essentially from the original infrastructure that has been built, and now you've got companies building platforms and software as a service on top of the initial infrastructure. This just gives you an idea of the compound annual growth rates, the CAGRs of the global public cloud service between 2018 and 2022. So it just shows you those sort of 4 odd years and what we've seen. And basically, the infrastructure as a service obviously showing the fastest growth rate, and this was done by Gartner just in early 2019, and these numbers are projected to actually be higher now over the next couple of years, just given the booster rocket really that's happened by necessity with the COVID-19 lockdown. So yes, while IaaS, infrastructure as a service, looks like the fastest growing component, we actually expect software as a service and platform as a service to match them rather closely. So all three areas are growing dramatically, double digits, and the likely numbers are going to be over a 20% compound annual growth rate for all three. That's the latest expectation. And what I thought was quite valuable just to see is, currently the percentage of enterprises that will close their traditional data centers or certainly reduce significantly their IT departments. This is showing basically that it's going to change dramatically by 2025. The latest respondents to a survey that Gartner did shows that basically 80% of corporations and enterprises expect to basically close their traditional data centers and to be able to essentially outsource onto third-party servers predominant amount of their data. So there's going to be a rather sizable sea change. It's already happening. Interestingly, with the COVID-19 shutdown, arguably the SMMEs, the small and medium-sized enterprises, in some cases have been far more flexible and been able to shift to a remote working environment even quicker than some of the bigger players who've got perhaps legacy issues or certain security matters that have taken them a bit longer to achieve remote working. I'm just going to move on to a related slide, which really breaks down the three core areas of cloud. So if you look at the yellow there, we're basically showing the growth in public cloud revenue in billions of dollars over the next couple of years. And you'll see the biggest component that is going to be actually growing will be software as a service in yellow. You can see the numbers actually going to essentially double over the next 5 years. And you'll see infrastructure as a service essentially is growing slightly slower. That's the prediction as a percentage, and platform as a service in the red will grow and mirror to a certain extent software. Just for your own interest, the green part really relates to cloud security and in particular privacy and cybersecurity matters. We find a number of cloud companies do have divisions that help in the privacy or in data protection areas. So there's certainly some overlap between data privacy and hack attacks that have occurred globally and the popularity of cloud. Here in California, when Hollywood was hacked some years ago, we found a number of the Hollywood players within 18 months had basically moved to the cloud adoption in a much faster way than they had previously done. And we found that the adoption rate for cloud certainly benefits from certain crises, whether it's well-known hacks that have occurred, everybody from British Airways to Equifax to the Hollywood hacks. That's certainly an area, and obviously now during coronavirus, we've certainly seen cloud usage picking up dramatically. So just main takeaway from this slide really is that software as a service will ultimately most likely become the biggest of the three areas. But there is certainly a crossover. You find companies in our own ETF that basically marry these areas, and they actually do cross over. And we do see and expect a lot more M&A activity from infrastructure players, platform players into the software area, largely because of the antitrust regulations here in the United States. We don't see mergers in the infrastructure areas. We see mergers where infrastructure players will essentially move into an area vertically integrated into platforms and into software as a service increasingly. So this slide really is just putting the numbers in a different chart, so you can essentially see the size of these underlying areas. And again, the point really comes out that it's a software as a service that is expected to really be powered and go from about 80 billion to just under 150 billion in the next 2 to 3 years. Most likely these numbers would have to be revised upwards because they were put together prior to coronavirus, and there's been a spike across the board in all these areas. In terms of usage, this table just basically summarizes that we're sitting at a level already before the coronavirus's impact has been seen, where it was predicted that the total market of revenues was going to essentially double from 180 billion at the end of 2018 to over 330 billion. The key point to take away is just the ease of use in cloud. It's become a lot less expensive and a lot easier for companies to access it. And you also found very, very big firms such as SAP, Salesforce, Oracle, increasingly partnering with the big infrastructure players. I know I mentioned earlier on how Salesforce is partnering with Microsoft, but you're finding Google and others increasingly also working with the likes of Oracle. So it's increasingly mainstream. We would not be surprised at all to see a lot more acquisitions in the space. And most experts in Silicon Valley believe that the current key battleground for big tech spending is basically a land grab in cloud. And obviously there are wonderful smaller software groups that are being acquired. I mean, we talked earlier on about Red Hat being acquired by IBM. One of the reasons was IBM's own infrastructure platform was well behind some of the other leaders. They were basically ranked way down in 5th place and had a very small market share in infrastructure, but by buying into a hybrid software provider, it's really thrust them into a much bigger part of the future of cloud, where data can be increasingly moved across different platforms. And that's where they see the next greater part of cloud coming from. Many experts believe that the easy part of outsourcing didn't require the level of flexibility in the early stages of cloud. Today, cloud is requiring, certainly the users need to be able to share the data across multiple platforms on the public side of cloud, but they also need to be able to move the data between private and public. We see big regulated entities such as insurers, banks, always requiring a private cloud of some sort. So it's going to be very difficult to match certain users like Airbnb or Netflix, who are able to outsource the vast majority of their operations to cloud for scalability reasons. It's very difficult for certain regulated entities to be able to completely outsource. And also in certain countries, they're going to always have to maintain control of their data. So we see cloud growing globally by also trying to provide services to these big regulated entities, particularly banks, for example, who have multiple subsidiaries. They will try and outsource as much as they can to regional or local clouds, but they will always have to maintain some level of private IT services. So the key question is, how quickly can they gravitate their data that they don't require for regulatory purposes, how quickly can they gravitate that to a third-party cloud provider? And it's happening before our eyes. I mentioned JP Morgan, but Barclays and a number of other very large banks such as Wells Fargo here in the US have signed billion-dollar or multi-billion-dollar deals. And interestingly, in the public sector, we've also seen the JEDI project, which was a $10 billion project, the largest government contract awarded yet in globally. It was awarded by the Pentagon. And although Amazon was the expected beneficiary, actually at the last minute, Microsoft Azure won the contract, and this is a $10 billion contract over 10 years that was recently awarded. We expect a lot more public sector contracts being awarded, and increasingly also in the sub-areas such as healthcare service providers. So we expect European healthcare providers to increasingly upscale and upgrade their cloud bandwidth. I just have a couple more slides to quickly run through. This is essentially showing how our SKYY ETF has performed over the last 5 or so years, and because we have 50 holdings and we cap the largest holdings weighted for 4%, we've tried to reduce any exposure to just the giant infrastructure providers such as the names I've mentioned earlier on. So we get up to 50 holdings by having the largest weightings capped at 4%, and it goes down to a 0.2 weighting. We saw in 2019 a significant gain of almost 40%, and year to date, as of the first quarter, SKYY was only down in single digits, about minus 7%, and at the moment, as of mid-April, it remained in single digits, hovering around -3 to -5%. But I think the key issue here is that we're straddling all three areas of cloud, infrastructure, software, and platform as a service. There are other products that cover cloud, but they may be more narrow. So it's important to look at what the underlying holdings are and just to see how broad the definition of the benchmark is. This is just a slide essentially showing the NAV performance on the right-hand side, and then the top 10 holdings on the left. And the reason those holdings may look like some of them are beyond 4% is that the index is rebalanced semi-annually, twice a year. So during that period, it may, a holdings weighting, if it's doing well, it may exceed the 4%, but then it's obviously at rebalance time, it's scaled back to the 4% cap that we have imposed. In that particular list over there, it's a combination of both infrastructure, platform, and some software companies in that list. And you'll see Alibaba from China has made the list. The typical cloud ETF, like our own, is certainly mostly US orientated, but we expect more global diversification to be coming through over the next couple of years. But certainly America is close to a 90% weighting at the present time. And this just really shows the lead in terms of infrastructure in cloud. So Amazon had invested the most money some years ago in the space, and they've certainly got a commanding presence and lead of about 33%, followed by Microsoft at about half of that market share, and then Google, and followed by IBM. You'll see Oracle and Salesforce down a little bit lower on, and they're basically increasingly partnering with some of the bigger firms. I will just mention that both Google Cloud, for the first time, their numbers have been broken out, and their year-on-year growth exceeds 50-odd% in terms of revenue growth. That's Google Cloud, which basically services a number of key areas. And we've even seen Apple as well now talking about breaking out their cloud revenues. I will also mention that Microsoft, as a percentage, has been growing in terms of their annual growth rate and have exceeded Amazon. So we actually see Amazon basically being pulled back into the pack, while Google and Microsoft are playing catch-up. But both Google and Microsoft are growing significantly faster. I think what's important here is that we expect the big guys to be able to make more acquisitions in downstream space. So the vertical integration of cloud is certainly an important area to watch, so that you'll find infrastructure and software companies either combining, merging, or working very closely together. This particular slide just summarizes Amazon's particular growth, and it shows basically how AWS, that's Amazon's web services, now account for actually more than 50% of the profits from Amazon. We saw last year that in the third and fourth quarters, Amazon actually generated almost 60% of its profits alone from AWS, so significantly more profitable in terms of profit margins than Amazon Prime, for instance. So it's certainly an area that's helping to subsidize Amazon's global growth. And this is just a quick summary of their sales at Amazon and how their profits so they have grown in red versus their sales numbers. And it's been very, very impressive, the amount of growth that we've seen in the space. And I look forward to turning it over to Edo. Just one last quick comment, which is that the China cloud is also dominated by some of the known entities such as Alibaba, which has really taken a leaf out of Amazon's Jeff Bezos' playbook, and they dominate with about 40%, followed by Tencent is there, and interestingly enough, AWS, Amazon have actually got in purple, have got a reasonable share of the Chinese market, but it's obviously dominated by those two initial big players. We expect, again, Alibaba's share to shrink a little bit over the next couple of years, and some of the other Chinese players, including social media players, to gain market share. So I look forward to going through some of the questions, and I'll just try to address the very first one, which has come through, which is how does the Hand-Gins ETF identify and capture companies involved in cloud technologies? It's a very good question. Typically, we look at revenues, and the easiest answer would be that anybody who's got cloud revenues exceeding 50% would certainly be part of our universe. We use Solactive. Solactive is a German-based index provider. They have a rules-based algorithm that looks at a number of areas across the cloud spectrum. So it looks at annual reports, it's looking at product launches, and they actually provide a ranking to us of from top to bottom of the most active companies in the cloud space, and they actually do the rebalancing every 6 months. So we do use a third-party rules-based cloud provider, which is certainly important for us. So that is outsourced to Solactive. They've helped us design the product where we have 50 underlying holdings and a cap, a maximum weighting of 4% on any one single stock. I thought I should just mention also the rise of cloud relative to some other areas. In the U.S., cloud mutual funds and ETF products have been available for somewhat longer than in Europe. Our own product in Europe was listed about 18 months ago in Milan and on the London and German stock exchanges in Frankfurt and the LSE. And we actually expect European investors to follow the U.S. demand, because in Europe, interestingly, robotics and other areas had earlier ETFs, but robotics revenues as a percentage of cloud revenues are basically about half the size, and we expect that the cloud revenues over time will increasingly dwarf some of the robotic revenue figures or models that we've seen coming through. So certainly as a theme within IT, we see cloud as being a larger theme than robotics. And this slide just refers to the different revenue levels predicted over the next couple of years when you look at the cloud revenue size relative to robotics. So that's quite interesting. It's in billions of dollars. And people have said to us, Anthony, can you quickly just look at and go through the different areas of technology? What is cloud-based applications in terms of what's hosted through software versus through the pipes, the plumbing themselves? I thought this chart may just give you a sense. If you look at email, for example, most of email is hosted on an infrastructure as a service platform, but there is a component of it that is software related. So voice over IP would be similar, call centers. So you can't completely separate these different areas, and that's why cloud is basically broken out across service providers. That's why we call it software as a service versus infrastructure as a service versus platforms as a service. It really is increasingly a hybrid platform, both in terms of individual applications that are cloud-based, but also in terms of how we've seen companies operate, where they want to outsource to multiple cloud providers. They don't want to have all their eggs in one basket, which was certainly a constraint on growth years ago. where firms may have felt that they had to bet the farm on a particular third-party provider. So another question I wanted to talk about is we don't actually invest in the user side of cloud. So while Airbnb and firms like Netflix and even Uber may be big users of cloud, our 50 underlying holdings are all on the technology side. The tricky part about focusing on the users is that you may land up with banks and insurance companies and other, shopping firms, for example, retailers who are also sizable users like Walmart of cloud. So we stayed away from going that route, and our holdings are all specifically on cloud technology, particularly companies that are developing IT, developing software, developing platforms. So I think that's quite an important distinction. Ultimately, the firms we're investing in are benefiting directly from the added traffic that is being put across or put it through their plumbing. So the more that Netflix is benefiting, frankly, over the last period with COVID-19, we saw Netflix have sizable numbers of new subscribers, more than 15 million new subscribers in just the last quarter alone. What we've seen is that our holdings benefit directly from the increased traffic. So we've stayed away from owning directly the users. We're basically purely on the technology side, but do cover all aspects of cloud. We're not just betting on software versus infrastructure or versus platforms. We're actually betting on all aspects. I will just say that in the corporate world, enterprise software, such as the likes of SAP and Oracle and Salesforce, these should really be seen as applications. Same way we talk about apps in the retail space, these corporate apps are increasingly relying on cloud delivery. And it means actually that no longer are those big firms such as SAP, Oracle, Salesforce, focusing only on large firms or bigger mid-size companies. They're able to now deliver downstream their services to an even smaller size enterprise. So we see the pipes of cloud really helping these big software and platform app providers getting their products spread to the developing world, emerging markets in a much lower cost delivery mechanism. I think for us that's quite an important component of where we see cloud growing globally. I'll just try and summarize and say, if you look at the cost, just as an example on this slide, we look at the relative costs of hardware versus outsourcing to a cloud provider. By keeping the maintenance costs and the IT on premises, the left part of this bar chart shows that a sizable component is just the maintenance and the ongoing overhead required to maintain premises of IT services physically, whereas the minute one outsources, there are significant cost savings, and a lot of those cost savings do relate to hardware and maintenance. In summary, I think it's important to just say that as cloud grows, it's very important to have some sort of rules-based benchmark so that one knows, okay, you're covering a specific universe of companies that are related to cloud. In our case, the companies have to have a majority of their revenues in this space. I did mention that cloud companies are benefiting from data protection and data privacy issues. Things like GDPR in the European space are helping to power outsourcing to expert cloud providers, and a number of smaller businesses just frankly don't have the capability anymore to keep a handle on such privacy issues, and the legal costs and possible fines associated with hacks has made many nervous. So whether it's large Hollywood studios or small and medium enterprises, we've seen many of them saying, we're not in the software engineering business, we no longer want to be hiring tons of IT engineers. We'd rather rely on some of the big tech providers to give us both cloud services as well as data privacy and data protection. I think, Eda, with that, I'll turn it over to you. I appreciate your time hosting the call very much, and it is a very, very exciting area. It's one of the fastest growing parts of not just IT, but I think what's important just to stress in summary is, unlike the NASDAQ index, where it's dominated by the FANGs, here in cloud we're seeing a lot of smaller and medium enterprises, firms such as we've touched on Dropbox, LogMeIn, and others, really coming to the fore with remote working. Many of you may know that the big school districts, both in the UK and in the US, are using providers such as Google Meet and others to really power remote learning. And the NHS is certainly also contracting increasingly with cloud providers and IT firms that are specialized in this space. So with that, I'll turn it back to Eda. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I think presentation is really interesting. I think you covered also the questions related to the methodology of the ETF itself. You made it quite clear. I'm reading questions from different sources, and I think you covered also the fact that we are not like the index doesn't invest in big users, but only the pure players of cloud, of the cloud space. I think I can summarize a number of other questions in one last one that comes somehow as a worry from a few investors. So basically, I received a number of questions asking, is it possible, like given this incredibly steep and quicker than expected cloud adoption, does especially the infrastructure providers, so the pipelines, do they have capacity, do they have bandwidth to actually bear this all these new onboarded players and users? Because I mean, you get the question.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. I know there was some concern actually at the beginning of coronavirus in Europe and in the US, where governments actually approached the likes of Netflix to ensure they would reduce the bandwidth that they were utilizing and the quality of the picture. The feedback we've received, the feedback we've received actually is that most people have not had a problem connecting. It's actually been increasingly positive, reflecting on the fact that most people haven't had a problem with their social media or their entertainment feeds during this lockdown period. So even though usage has spiked, I have to give credit to some of the big infrastructure providers that they've been able to provide enough servers and enough capacity. So we actually haven't seen a loss in reliability. I think some people were concerned, as you say, Edo, rightly, that maybe the reliability, the online connection maybe would be much slower. The reason in the US has been that most workers have been able to work remotely without any interruption. And interestingly, with the concern that the government's had, cutting back on the picture quality of the Netflix and other streaming services, actually, we haven't heard complaints. So I'm happy to say at the moment, cloud has fared very well. The reliability, and some of it has to be also given credit to the telecoms companies as well, whether it's 4G, now increasingly 5G, that have helped with the speed and reliability. And obviously the streaming, while it may have doubled in many areas, the good news is that the infrastructure over the last 5 years in cloud has been built out sufficiently that there was significant spare capacity going into COVID-19. I think that's really the message. So, and there are a number of key players actually increasingly also on the software side that were concerned that they may be overloaded, but by utilizing cloud providers, they've been able to double, sometimes quadruple their capacity. So the good news is even a number of these video conferencing companies that have seen a terrific spike haven't really seen a shortfall in service, and that's probably why you've seen a number of the prices of software companies in our area really spiking and gaining significant growth. Obviously, a number of the big infrastructure players are back over $1 trillion of market cap again. So, yeah, I think that shows a vote of confidence. I'll just quickly say, in terms of Microsoft's market value or market cap, we see basically 50% of it attributed to their cloud focus and cloud business. They've been very clever about rolling Office and Windows and 365 into a cloud service and linking it as part of a cross-sale. So they've benefited, and they've been able to show significant reliability over this period. I hope that answers it a little bit.
Yeah, I think I can only, if we now fear economic stoppages and breakdowns, I can only imagine if this crisis would have happened 20 years ago without cloud capacity. Like we really would have had to shut down everything, no education, no e-commerce, no nothing. So,
and of course, you in Italy have suffered the most, and I hope that you've been able to at least have reliable connections, and you've had a reasonable success.
I'm broadcasting from quarantine day, probably 1,500 or something. I don't know. I lost complete count. Here near Milan is the worst area. Possibly we have like 20% of the death worldwide, but still, it held quite well. I think we can use this positive message among many inputs. We can use it to close this conversation with a kind of an open message. And the good news is that the cloud so far is holding well, and they are probably organizing themselves to for the days to come, when probably our way of work will not go back as it was before this crisis. So we are getting accustomed to these tools, and we will use them probably more and more. So, for instance, I was able to keep on working exactly as before, and probably the world will turn a little bit to this. I want to thank you again, Anthony, for your presentation. I want to thank the audience for following us. I invite everybody who wants to sign up to our Bright Talk channel, in which we will present many different topics. With Anthony next week, we got another one in agenda covering also some other exciting developments in blockchain, healthcare revolution, a broader basket of technology, and feel free to send some feedbacks here in Bright Talk or to our personal contacts. And nothing. Thank you again, Anthony, and speak soon.
Thank you, Edo. Ciao. Bye-bye.
Ciao. Bye-bye.